The scorching sun hung merciless in the cloudless sky, casting long shadows across the parched fields of western Kansas. It was the summer of 1870, and the land seemed to groan under the weight of another drought. Red dust swirled in the hot wind, coating everything in a fine layer of grit that found its way into every crack and crevice. In the distance, the jagged outline of the Rockies stood like ancient sentinels, their peaks lost in the haze of heat that shimmered above the plains. Clara Henderson stood on the weathered porch of her homestead, one hand shielding her eyes as she gazed out at the endless expanse of brown grass and stunted corn. The wooden boards beneath her feet, once lovingly laid by her late husband Samuel, creaked with each shift of her weight. She was 23 years old, though the harsh prairie life had already etched fine lines around her green eyes and weathered her fair skin to a permanent tan. It had been 6 months since Samuel's death. 6 months since she'd found him slumped over near the well, his face an unnatural shade of blue, foam at the corners of his mouth. The doctor from town had mumbled something about bad water or perhaps spoiled meat, but Clara knew better. Samuel had been strong as an ox, careful about what he ate and drank. The timing was too convenient, just days after he'd refused to sell their land to the Garrison Land Company. The wind picked up, sending tumbleweeds racing across the yard and rattling the loose shutter Samuel had meant to fix. Clara pulled her faded calico dress tighter around her slim frame. Everything reminded her of him: the half-finished fence posts stacked by the barn, the rocking chair he'd carved for her birthday, the bed they'd shared for 3 short years. From somewhere in the distant mountains came the lonely howl of a wolf, soon answered by another. The sound sent shivers down her spine despite the heat. Night was the worst time. That's when the coyotes grew bold, circling the chicken coop, and when every shadow could hide danger. That's when she felt most alone in this vast, unforgiving land. Clara turned and walked back into the small cabin, her boots echoing hollowly on the pine floors. The main room served as kitchen, dining area, and parlor all in one. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, cold now in the summer heat. Shelves lined another wall, holding her few precious books and Samuel's collection of almanacs. Everything was neat and tidy. She had little else to occupy her time but cleaning and maintaining what little they'd built together. On the rough-hewn table sat a letter from the First National Bank of Dodge City. She'd read it so many times the paper had worn soft at the creases. $300. That's what stood between her and losing everything. Samuel had borrowed the money to buy seed and equipment, confident that this year's harvest would set them right. But the drought had other plans, and now the bank wanted its due. Clara sank into a chair, her calloused hands folded in her lap. She could sell, of course. That's what everyone expected. What kind of woman tried to run a homestead alone? She could still hear the whispers from her last trip to town, see the pitying looks from the other women as they clutched their husbands' arms a little tighter. "Poor thing, Mrs." Abernathy had said, loud enough for Clara to hear. "Samuel should have left her better provided for. Mark my words, she'll be married again before the year is out, or working in one of those establishments." The memory made Clara's jaw clench. She'd rather die than prove them right. This land was all she had left of Samuel, of their dreams. Every sunrise over the wheat fields, every sunset painting the mountains purple and gold. These were the promises they'd made to each other, the future they'd planned while lying beneath the vast prairie stars. She stood abruptly, crossing to the corner where Samuel's Winchester rifle rested against the wall. Her fingers traced the smooth wood of the stock, remembering how he'd taught her to shoot. "A woman alone needs to know how to protect herself," he'd said, his hands gentle as he showed her how to sight down the barrel. She'd become a fair shot, good enough to bring down a rabbit or scare off a coyote. The rifle was loaded. She made sure of that every night now. As the sun began its descent toward the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Clara busied herself with the evening chores. The 3 remaining chickens needed to be secured in their coop, the old milk cow brought in from the pasture. These simple tasks gave structure to her days, kept her hands busy while her mind wandered, She scattered feed for the chickens, smiling slightly as they pecked and squabbled around her feet. "Easy now, Matilda," she murmured to the red hen who always pushed the others aside. "There's enough for everyone." The cow, Bessie, stood patiently by the gate, her large brown eyes watching Clara's approach. The animal had been a wedding gift from Samuel's parents, who'd died of fever the following winter. Now Bessie was her only source of milk and butter, though the poor creature was growing thin on the sparse grass. Night fell quickly on the prairie, the temperature dropping as stars began to pierce the darkening sky. Clara secured the barn and returned to the house, pausing on the porch to listen. The wind had died down, leaving an almost oppressive silence. No insects chirped, no night birds called. Even the ever-present whisper of grass had stilled. Something was wrong. She'd lived here long enough to know the rhythms of the land, the subtle signs that meant storm or danger. This silence was different, heavy, expectant, like the pause before lightning strikes. Clara stepped inside and barred the door, her movements quick but controlled. She lit the oil lamp, its warm glow pushing back the shadows but making the windows into black mirrors. Her reflection stared back at her, a young woman with worry lines that belonged on someone twice her age. Auburn hair pulled back in a practical bun, dress patched and mended but clean. She tried to shake off the feeling of unease. It was probably nothing, just her nerves, frayed from too many nights alone, too many days fighting to keep hope alive. She prepared a simple supper of cornbread and beans, forcing herself to eat though her appetite had fled. The first sound came just as she was cleaning the dishes, a creak from the front porch, too heavy to be wind. Clara froze, soap suds dripping from her hands. Another creak, then another. Footsteps, multiple sets, her heart hammering. She dried her hands on her apron and moved silently to the rifle. The weight of it in her hands was reassuring, familiar. She'd faced down claim jumpers before, men who thought a widow would be easy pickings. They'd learned otherwise. A rough laugh came from outside, followed by voices. "Lights on. She's home. 'Bout time we paid the widow Henderson a visit." Clara recognized the voice. Jake Morrison, one of Garrison's hired men. She'd seen him in town, always smelling of whiskey and cheap tobacco, his eyes following her with an intensity that made her skin crawl. "Remember what the boss said?" Another voice added. "We're just here to encourage her to see reason." More laughter, ugly and full of promise. Clara's mind raced. The windows were shuttered, but the door wouldn't hold long against determined men. She could try to slip out the back, but they probably had someone watching there too. Her only advantage was that they didn't know she was armed and ready. The doorknob rattled. "Mrs. Henderson, we know you're in there. Just want to talk about that banknote. Mr. Garrison's made you a generous offer." Clara said nothing, raising the rifle to her shoulder. "Let them come." Samuel had built this home with his own hands, had died defending their claim to this land. She wouldn't dishonor his memory by surrendering without a fight. The rattling stopped. For a moment, blessed silence returned. Then the door exploded inward with a crash that shook the entire cabin. 3 men burst through, Morrison and 2 others she didn't recognize, all big and mean-looking with pistols at their hips. Clara fired, the Winchester's report deafening in the small space. The shot went high, splintering the door frame and making the men duck. Before she could lever another round into the chamber, Morrison was on her. He knocked the rifle from her hands with brutal efficiency, his thick fingers wrapping around her wrists. Now, that wasn't very neighborly. He growled, his breath hot and sour against her face. "Here we come for a civilized discussion, and you start shooting." Clara struggled against his grip, trying to knee him, bite him, anything. But the other men were there now, grabbing her arms, forcing her down. She fought like a wildcat, Samuel's name a battle cry on her lips. But it was 3 against 1. They bound her wrists with a rough rope that bit into her skin, then her ankles. When she tried to scream, Morrison stuffed a dirty rag into her mouth, tying it in place with another strip of cloth. The taste made her gag, but she forced herself to breathe through her nose, to stay calm. "There now," Morrison said, standing back to admire their handiwork. Clara lay on her own floor, trussed like a calf for branding, her eyes blazing with fury above the gag. "Much better. Now we can have that talk." He squatted beside her, his hand reaching out to touch her cheek. She jerked away, and he laughed. "Still got spirit. I like that. Makes it more fun when they break." One of the other men, a thin fellow with a scar across his nose, was already ransacking the cabin. He swept books off the shelves, overturned drawers, scattered her few precious belongings across the floor. "Where's she keep the money, Jake?" "Doubt she's got any," Morrison replied, not taking his eyes off Clara. "But check anyway, and find the deed to this place. Boss wants to make sure there's no complications." Clara watched helplessly as they destroyed her home. These men who smelled of violence and whiskey. They found Samuel's strongbox under the bed, smashing it open to reveal the pitiful $20 she'd saved and the deed to the homestead. "This all?" Scarface asked, waving the bills. "Take it," Morrison said. "Every bit helps." He leaned closer to Clara, his voice dropping to a whisper. "This land's gonna be garrison property soon enough. You can make it easy or hard, but either way, you're leaving. Widow or not, you're done here." They continued their destruction, breaking dishes, tearing curtains, crushing the pressed flowers she'd kept from her wedding bouquet. Each crash, each casual act of cruelty, felt like another death when they finally tired of their sport. Morrison stood and stretched. "We'll give you some time to think about Mr. Garrison's offer," he said. "Next time we come back, hopefully you'll be more receptive." He touched his hat in a mockery of courtesy. "Pleasant dreams, Mrs. Henderson." They filed out, laughing and congratulating themselves. Clara heard their horses' hoofbeats fade into the distance, leaving her alone in the wreckage of her life. The lamp still burned on the table, its light wavering as oil ran low, casting dancing shadows on the walls. She tested her bonds, but Morrison knew his business. The ropes were tight, professional. Already her hands were going numb. The gag made it hard to breathe, harder to swallow. Panic clawed at her throat, but she forced it down. Panic wouldn't help. Samuel wouldn't have panicked. The night stretched on, endless and suffocating. The lamp guttered and died, plunging the cabin into darkness. Cold seeped through the gaps in the walls, and Clara shivered on the hard floor. Her shoulders screamed from the unnatural position, her wrists raw from futile struggling. Through the broken door, she could see stars wheeling overhead, indifferent to her plight. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote yipped, joined by others in a wild chorus. The sound seemed to mock her, she who had fought so hard to prove she could survive alone. Now, helpless as a newborn, but even as despair threatened to overwhelm her, a small flame of defiance remained. They could tie her up, destroy her possessions, threaten and intimidate. But this was her land, bought with Samuel's sweat and blood. She would not yield, not to Morrison, not to Garrison, not to all the forces that wanted to grind her down. The wind picked up again, whistling through the cabin and bringing the scent of sage and dust. It was the smell of the frontier, of endless possibilities and crushing hardships. Clara closed her eyes and let it fill her lungs, drawing strength from the land itself. She would survive this night. Somehow, she would survive. The darkness pressed against Clara like a living thing, heavy and suffocating. She lay on the cold floor, every muscle screaming in protest against the cruel bondage. The ropes had cut off circulation to her hands hours ago, leaving them numb and useless. Her shoulders burned from being wrenched back, and the gag had rubbed the corners of her mouth raw. Time lost all meaning in the pitch black of the cabin. Was it midnight? 3 a.m? The only way to mark its passage was the slow parade of constellations visible through the broken doorway and the gradual stiffening of her body against the hard pine boards. She tried to shift position, to ease the fire in her joints, But Morrison's knots held fast. A whimper escaped through the gag, and she hated herself for the weakness. Samuel would have been ashamed to see her like this, helpless, defeated, reduced to an animal trussed for slaughter. But no, that wasn't true. Samuel would have been furious at the men who'd done this, not at her. She could almost hear his voice, gentle but firm. "Clara, girl, you're the strongest woman I know. Don't you dare give up now." The memory of him was so vivid it brought tears to her eyes. She could see him clearly in her mind, tall and lean, with sandy hair that never would lie flat and hands scarred from years of hard work. He'd had a way of smiling that made even the hardest days bearable, a quiet confidence that tomorrow would be better than today. They'd met at a barn raising in Dodge City 3.5 years ago. She'd been serving lemonade with the other women when she noticed him watching her, not with the bold hunger of most young men, but with something softer, more respectful. When he finally worked up the courage to approach, he'd stammered through an introduction that made her laugh. "I'm not usually this tongue-tied," he'd said, his ears turning red. "It's just that you're the prettiest thing I've seen since coming west, and that includes the sunrise over the Rockies." Such a simple compliment, but delivered with such sincerity that she'd believed him. They danced that night to fiddle music under the stars, and she'd known even then that her life had changed course. The courtship had been swift by Eastern standards, but practically leisurely for the frontier. Samuel called on her every Sunday for 2 months, bringing small gifts, a ribbon for her hair, a book of poetry, once a handful of wildflowers that had wilted in the heat before he reached her. Her father had approved. Samuel Henderson was known as a hard worker with a good claim. They'd married in the spring of 1867, when the prairie was carpeted with bluebonnets and the future seemed as endless as the sky. The first year had been hard but happy. They'd built the cabin together, Clara mixing mud for chinking while Samuel notched logs. She'd learned to cook over an open fire, to haul water from the well, to tell the difference between the cry of a hawk and the scream of a rabbit caught by a fox. Nights had been their reward for the brutal days. After supper, they'd sit on the porch and plan their future. Samuel would sketch improvements in the dirt with a stick. Here, a larger barn. There, an orchard. Over there, a windmill to bring up water. Clara would add her own dreams. A flower garden, a room for children, maybe even a piano someday. "We'll have the finest spread in the county," Samuel would say, pulling her close, "and the prettiest wife to go with it." She'd swat him playfully. "Flattery won't get you out of dish duty. Mr. Henderson, worth a try. Mrs. Henderson." The memory was so clear she could almost smell his pipe tobacco, feel the warmth of his arm around her shoulders. Those evenings seemed like something from another lifetime now, a fairy tale that had ended too soon and too cruelly. The second year had brought challenges. The wheat crop failed when grasshoppers descended in a biblical plague, devouring everything green in sight. They'd survived on Clara's vegetable garden and what game Samuel could shoot. When winter came early and harsh, they'd huddled together for warmth, burning furniture when the wood ran out. But they'd survived. And the third year had started with such promise. The rains came at the right time. The wheat grew tall and golden. Samuel had taken out the loan for new equipment, confident this would be their year. They'd even talked about starting a family. Then came that terrible morning. Clara had been feeding the chickens when she realized Samuel hadn't come in for breakfast. She'd found him by the well, already cold, his face twisted in an expression of surprise and pain. The bucket lay overturned beside him, water soaking into the dusty ground. Doctor. Holcomb had ridden out from town, but there was nothing to be done. Could have been his heart, the old man had said, not meeting her eyes. "Sometimes these things just happen." But Clara had seen the bruising on Samuel's neck, faint but unmistakable. She'd smelled something sweet and chemical on his clothes, and she'd remembered Samuel mentioning that Garrison's men had been sniffing around, asking questions about water rights and property lines. She'd tried to tell the sheriff, but he'd patted her hand like she was a hysterical child. "Now, Mrs. Henderson, grief can make us see things that aren't there. Best you focus on arrangements." The funeral had been sparse. A few neighbors, the minister, Samuel's cousin from Colorado, who'd stayed just long enough to hint that she should sell and move back east where she belonged. She'd stood at the graveside in her black dress, dry-eyed and straight-backed, making a silent promise to the man she'd loved that she would not let his death be in vain. A coyote's howl, closer now, brought Clara back to the present. The sound raised goosebumps on her arms. The broken door was an invitation to any predator bold enough to investigate. She was a feast laid out for scavengers, human and animal alike. She renewed her struggles against the ropes, twisting her wrists until she felt warm blood seep between her fingers. The pain was almost welcome. It meant she still had fight left, but the knots held firm, and exhaustion soon forced her to lie still again. The oil lamp had long since died, but now she noticed a faint graying of the darkness outside. Dawn was coming, though what good it would do her she couldn't say. No one would come looking. She'd made a point of being self-sufficient, of not needing anyone. The neighbors were miles away, and she wasn't expected in town for another week. Thirst began to torment her. The gag absorbed what little moisture was in her mouth, leaving her tongue swollen and dry. She could see the water bucket across the room, knocked over in the struggle but still containing a few precious inches. It might as well have been an ocean away. As the sky lightened, revealing the full extent of the damage to her home, despair crept in like fog. Everything she and Samuel had built, everything she'd fought to preserve, lay in ruins. Broken dishes crunched under scattered flour. Her few books, treasures in this illiterate land, lay spine-broken on the floor. The curtains she'd sewn from feed sacks hung in tatters. But it was the small cruelties that cut deepest. Samuel's pipe, crushed under a boot heel. Their wedding photograph, the glass smashed and the image torn. The quilt her mother had made, slashed with a knife. These men hadn't just wanted to frighten her. They'd wanted to erase every trace of happiness from her life. Hot tears slid down her cheeks and soaked into the gag. She'd been so strong for so long, carrying grief like a stone in her chest, never allowing herself the luxury of breaking down. Now, bound and helpless, the dam finally burst. She wept for Samuel, for their unborn children, for the dreams that lay as broken as the dishes on her floor. The sun crept higher, sending dusty beams through the windows. The temperature began to rise, and with it came flies, drawn by the scent of fear and blood. They landed on her face, crawled across her closed eyelids, and she couldn't brush them away. This fresh torment seemed almost too much to bear. She must have dozed, exhaustion finally overwhelming pain and thirst, because suddenly the sun was high and hot. Her dress was soaked with sweat, her throat a column of fire. Delirium crept at the edges of her vision, making the shadows dance and whisper. Was that Samuel in the corner, shaking his head sadly? No, just her wedding dress hanging from a peg, stirring in the breeze through the broken door. Was that her mother calling her name? No, just the wind sighing through the rafters. She tried to pray, but the words wouldn't come. What God would allow this? What divine plan included a young woman dying of thirst on her own floor, bound like an animal? Better to save her strength, though for what she couldn't say. The afternoon stretched on, each minute an eternity. Her world narrowed to the most basic elements, the burn of rope on flesh, the taste of dirty cloth, the weight of her body against unyielding wood. She felt herself fading, her consciousness flickering like a candle in the wind. Morrison would return eventually. She knew. He'd find her broken, perhaps dead, and Garrison would get the land without even paying for it. The bank would foreclose, the county would auction, and her name would be forgotten. Just another failed homesteader, another woman who'd tried to make it alone and prove the gossips right. "I'm sorry, Samuel," she whispered in her mind. "I tried. I swear I tried." The sun began its descent toward the mountains, painting the cabin walls gold, then orange, then red. Soon it would be dark again, and she didn't think she could survive another night. Already her heartbeat seemed sluggish, her breathing shallow. The human body could only endure so much. She closed her eyes, ready to let go, when she heard it. the steady clop of hooves approaching from the east. Her eyes flew open, hope and fear warring in her chest. Had Morrison come back already? Or could it be salvation in the form of a passing traveler? The hoofbeats stopped just outside. Spurs jingled as someone dismounted. A shadow fell across the doorway, and Clara held her breath, waiting to learn her fate. The dusty road stretched endlessly before Luke Thornton as he guided his horse through another nameless valley in western Kansas. He'd been riding since dawn, the late afternoon sun now beating down mercilessly on his weathered hat. His mare, Sage, picked her way carefully through the ruts and stones, as tired as her rider but equally determined to find shelter before nightfall. Luke was 32. Though the hard years showed in the deep lines around his gray eyes and the streaks of premature silver in his dark beard. He'd been drifting for near on 5 years now, ever since the war ended and he'd found nothing left of his Tennessee home but ashes and graves. The West had called to him then, not with promises of gold or glory, but with the simple offer of space to forget. He worked when he could find it, breaking horses, driving cattle, fixing fences. He slept under stars more often than roofs, owned nothing that wouldn't fit in his saddlebags, and answered to no one but himself. It was a lonely life, but loneliness was an old companion now, as familiar as the Colt .45 on his hip or the ache in his left shoulder where a Union bullet had found its mark at Shiloh. The wind kicked up, sending dust devils spinning across the barren landscape. Luke pulled his neckerchief up over his nose and squinted ahead. According to the last town's gossip, there should be a few homesteads along this trail, places where a man might water his horse and maybe buy a meal if the owners were hospitable. He'd learned to read the land like scripture during his wandering years. The way birds circled meant water nearby. The color of distant smoke told you whether folks were cooking supper or fighting prairie fires. And right now, something in the very air felt wrong, too quiet, too still, like the earth itself was holding its breath. Sage felt it too. Her ears swiveled constantly, and she tossed her head, fighting the bit. "Easy, girl," Luke murmured, patting her neck. "We'll find a place to rest soon." That's when he saw it, a homestead cabin about a quarter-mile off the trail, sitting alone on a small rise. Even from this distance, something seemed off. The door hung open, dark as a missing tooth. No smoke rose from the chimney despite the approaching evening. No stock moved in the yard. Luke had survived this long by trusting his instincts, and right now they were screaming warnings. Abandoned homesteads weren't uncommon. The prairie broke more folks than it made, but this felt different, recent, wrong. He turned Sage toward the cabin, loosening the leather loop that held his pistol in place. As they drew closer, more details emerged. The garden gate swung on one hinge, chickens scratched in the dirt, uncollected and unfed. A milk cow stood by the barn, lowing mournfully with swollen udders. Luke dismounted about 50 yards out, ground-tying Sage with a practiced gesture. She'd wait there, ready for a quick escape if needed. He approached on foot, spurs muffled by the thick dust, hand resting on his gun butt. The destruction became clearer with each step. Scattered belongings in the yard, a broken mirror, torn fabric, papers fluttering in the breeze. The door frame was splintered as if kicked in. Dark stains on the porch looked suspiciously like dried blood. "Hello, the house," Luke called, though he expected no answer. "Anyone home?" Silence, thick as molasses. He climbed the steps carefully, testing each board. The porch was solid built, the work of someone who'd cared about craftsmanship. Through the doorway, he could see chaos, overturned furniture, smashed crockery, the remnants of a life torn apart. Luke drew his pistol and stepped inside, letting his eyes adjust to the dimness. The smell hit him first, fear sweat and something else, something that made his neck hair stand up. He'd smelled it before, in too many places, the scent of violence. A soft sound, barely more than a whisper, came from his left. Luke spun, gun raised, then froze. There on the floor lay a woman, bound hand and foot, gagged with what looked like a dirty bandana. Her green eyes, wide with terror and hope, locked onto his. "Lord Almighty," Luke breathed. He holstered his gun and knelt beside her, pulling out his knife. "Easy now, ma'am. I'm going to cut you loose." The woman, young, maybe early 20s, made urgent noises through the gag, her eyes darting toward the door and back. Luke understood. "They gone?" he asked. She nodded vigorously. "Coming back." A shrug. She didn't know. He sliced through the gag first, pulling the foul cloth from her mouth as gently as he could. She gasped, coughing, her voice coming out as a raw croak. "Water, please." In a moment, Luke promised. Working on the ropes at her wrists, they were cruelly tight, cutting deep into her flesh. Blood had dried black around the wounds. "This is going to hurt some," she nodded, biting her lip as he cut the bonds. When her hands came free, she cried out softly, tears streaming as circulation returned in painful needles. Luke moved to her ankles, trying not to notice how her dress had ridden up in her struggles, revealing legs marked with rope burns. "There now," he said when the last rope fell away. "Let me get you that water." He found the bucket, mostly empty but with a few inches of clean water at the bottom. He supported her into a sitting position and held it to her lips, letting her drink in small sips, though she clearly wanted to gulp it all. "Slow now," he cautioned. "Too much too fast will make you sick." She nodded, her hands shaking as they covered his on the bucket. When she'd drunk enough, she leaned back against the wall, breathing hard. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you, thank you." "How long you been tied up like that, ma'am?" "Since last night, maybe 10 o'clock. Her voice was getting stronger, though still hoarse. "They broke in. 3 men. Luke did quick calculations. Near on 20 hours, then. In this heat, without water. It was a miracle she was conscious, let alone coherent. "They rob you?" A bitter laugh. "Rob? They want my land. Garrison Land Company. They want everything." Luke had heard the name. Big outfit out of Dodge City, buying up failed homesteads for pennies on the dollar, sometimes helping create those failures. "You hurt anywhere besides the ropes? Should I fetch a doctor?" She shook her head. "No doctor, no sheriff. They won't help." She tried to stand and swayed dangerously. Luke caught her elbow, steadying her. "I need to. The animals. I'll tend them. You need to rest." "No, She took a step and her knees buckled. Only Luke's quick reflexes kept her from falling. "Stubborn as a mule, aren't you?" he said, not unkindly. "Come on, let's get you in a chair at least." He helped her to the one unbroken chair, then set about straightening the worst of the mess while she watched with dull eyes. He righted the table, picked up what dishes weren't smashed, found a broom and swept the debris into a pile. Small actions, but they seemed to help her gather herself. "I'm Luke Thornton," he said as he worked. "Passing through from Colorado way? Clara Henderson." She winced as she flexed her fingers, trying to work feeling back into them. "This was my husband's place, mine now. He died 6 months back. That explains some things. A widow alone was easy prey for men like Garrison's hired guns." "I'm sorry for your loss, ma'am." "Thank you." She watched him pour fresh water from the well into a clean cup. "Most folks would have ridden on by. Safer that way." Luke shrugged. Never been accused of an excess of good sense. He handed her the cup. "Small sips, remember?" While she drank, he went out to tend the animals. The cow was in real distress, so he milked her into a bucket, his hands remembering the rhythm from childhood. The chickens he scattered grain for, making a mental note to secure the coop before dark. Sage he brought closer to the house, unsaddling her and turning her into the small corral with hay and water. When he returned, Clara had managed to stand and was trying to clean some of the destruction. "You should rest," he told her. "I've rested enough." There was steel in her voice now, the shock wearing off. "This is my home. I won't let them win." Luke studied her as she worked, Pretty enough, even with her hair falling from its pins and dust on her dress. But it was the set of her jaw that impressed him, the way she attacked each task like it was a personal enemy. This was no swooning Eastern belle. This was a woman forged by the prairie, bent but not broken. "Tell me about these men," he said, helping her gather scattered papers. "You know them? Jake Morrison leads them. Works for Garrison. They've been pressuring me to sell ever since Samuel died. I think—" She paused, then continued more quietly. "I think they killed him. Made it look natural, but I know better." Luke had seen enough evil to believe her. "Why not just move on? Plenty of other land out there." She whirled on him, eyes flashing. "This is my land. My husband's blood is in this soil. We built this place board by board, planted every seed, dug every post hole. I won't let them steal it." Fair enough. He liked her fire, the way she refused to be cowed. "What will you do when they come back?" Her shoulders sagged slightly. "I don't know. I had Samuel's rifle, but they took it. I suppose I'll think of something." Night was falling now, purple shadows stretching across the prairie. Luke made a decision that surprised him. He'd been making a lot of those lately. "I'll stay the night, if you'll have me. Make sure they don't come back while you're recovering." She looked at him suspiciously. "Why would you do that? You don't know me." "No," he agreed. "But I know men like Morrison, and I've got a powerful dislike for folks who tie up women and leave them to die." He met her eyes steadily. "I'll bed down in the barn. You'll be safe from me. You have my word." She studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "There's stew fixings in the pantry. Least I can do is feed you." They worked together to create some order from chaos. Then Clara put together a simple meal while Luke boarded up the broken door. They ate in companionable silence, both too tired for conversation. As full darkness fell, Luke stood to go. "The barn's got fresh straw in the loft." Clara said, "And Mr. Thornton." "Thank you. I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't come along." "You'd have found a way," Luke said with certainty. "You're a fighter, Mrs. Henderson. Don't let anyone tell you different." He gathered his bedroll and rifle, heading for the barn. At the door, he turned back. "Bar the door behind me. I'll knock 3 times if I need to come back. Anyone else tries to get in, you scream loud as you can." She nodded, and he heard the heavy bar drop into place as he walked away. In the barn, he climbed to the loft and spread his bedroll where he could see both the house and the road. His rifle lay ready beside him, pistol under the rolled coat that served as his pillow. Sleep wouldn't come easy tonight, but that was nothing new. He'd stood guard plenty of times before, watching for Apache raiders or Union patrols or simple bandits. But this felt different somehow. Maybe it was the woman's quiet courage, or the familiar story of big money crushing small dreams. Or maybe he was just tired of drifting, of having nothing worth defending. Through the loft window, he could see lamplight glowing in the cabin. Clara Henderson was probably cleaning still, trying to restore order to her world. Tomorrow Morrison might return, or Garrison himself, or hired guns worse than either. But tonight, she was safe. Tonight, he'd make sure of that. A coyote howled in the distance, answered by another, then another. The night hunters were out, following ancient paths under ancient stars. Luke settled in for a long watch, rifle across his knees, guarding a woman he'd just met and a homestead that wasn't his. "I'll not leave you to the silence," he murmured to the night. Whatever tomorrow brought, Clara Henderson wouldn't face it alone. He'd make sure of that too. Luke worked with practiced efficiency, the knife moving smoothly through the cruel bonds. His hands were gentle but sure, the hands of a man who had tended wounded soldiers and injured horses, who understood that sometimes kindness mattered more than speed. "There now?" he murmured as the gag came free, his voice low and soothing like he was calming a spooked mare. Clara gasped and coughed, her throat working desperately to swallow. He could see how cracked her lips were, how her tongue seemed swollen. "Water," she croaked, the single word barely audible. "Let me get these ropes off first," Luke said, already sawing at the bonds around her wrists. The rope had cut deep, leaving angry welts that would scar. Blood had dried black around the wounds, and he winced in sympathy. "This might hurt some when the blood flows back," she nodded, tears already streaming down her face from the pain. When her hands came free, she couldn't suppress a soft cry as circulation returned in burning needles. Luke moved to her ankles, trying to be respectful as he pushed her skirts aside just enough to reach the ropes. "You're safe now," he said quietly, working the knife through the final bonds. "They're gone, and they won't hurt you again while I'm here." When the last rope fell away, Clara tried to sit up and immediately swayed. Luke caught her shoulders, steadying her against the wall. Up close, he could see the bruise forming on her cheek, the way her auburn hair had come loose from its pins, hanging in tangled strands around her face. "Easy does it," he said. "You've been tied up a long while. Let your body remember how to work again." He fetched the water bucket, noting how little remained. She must have been staring at it all day, dying of thirst with the water just out of reach. The cruelty of it made his jaw clench. He knelt beside her, holding the bucket steady as she drank in desperate gulps. "Slow," he cautioned. "Too much too fast and you'll bring it back up." She forced herself to pause, panting, then took smaller sips. When she'd had enough, she leaned back against the wall, closing her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered. I thought I was going to die here." "Well, you didn't," Luke said matter-of-factly. "You're tougher than they figured. Now, are you hurt anywhere else? Did they—" He paused, not sure how to ask what he needed to know. "No," Clara said quickly, understanding. "They just tied me up, ransacked the place. They wanted to scare me." A bitter laugh escaped her. "It worked." Luke doubted that. Scared people didn't have that fire in their eyes, that set to their jaw that said they'd fight to their last breath. He helped her to her feet, keeping a steadying hand on her elbow as she tested her balance. "Careful now," he said as she swayed. 20 hours without water in this heat. You're bound to be wobbly." She took a tentative step, then another, determination clear on her face. "I need to see what they've done. And the animals, I'll check on them directly. You sit down before you fall down." He guided her to an overturned chair, righted it, and gently pushed her into it. "What's your name, ma'am?" "Clara Henderson." She looked around at the destruction, and he saw her throat work as she swallowed hard. "This is my home. Was my home. Still is," Luke said firmly. "Just needs some tidying. I'm Luke Thornton. By the way, was passing through when I saw your door hanging open. Most people would have kept riding. Most people have better sense than me." He found a relatively clean cup and poured fresh water from the pitcher that had somehow survived the rampage. "Here, drink this while I check on your stock." Outside, Luke took quick inventory. 3 chickens scratched in the dirt, unfed but unharmed. A milk cow stood by the barn, her udders swollen and clearly painful. No horses, which meant Clara was truly stranded. He tended the animals quickly, his mind already working through the problem at hand. Morrison and his men would be back. They'd gone to too much trouble to give up now, and they'd expect to find Clara broken, maybe dead, instead. They'd find her recovered and with help. That would change their plans, make them either more cautious or more desperate. When he returned to the cabin, Clara had managed to stand and was picking up broken dishes with shaking hands. "You should rest," he told her. "If I sit still, I'll think too much," she replied, not looking at him. About what could have happened, about what still might. Luke understood that. After battles, he'd always needed to keep moving, keep working, keep the memories at bay until he was ready to face them. He joined her in cleaning, working in companionable silence as they restored some order to the chaos. "Tell me about the men who did this," he said eventually. Clara's hand stilled on the torn book she was holding. "Jake Morrison. He works for Thomas Garrison, owns the Garrison Land Company. They've been buying up all the failed homesteads around here, sometimes at gunpoint." She carefully smoothed the pages of the book. trying to press them back together. My husband Samuel died 6 months ago. They started coming around the very next week. How did your husband die? She looked at him sharply, then away. Doctor said it was his heart, but Samuel was strong as an ox, never sick a day in his life. Then one morning I found him by the well, already cold. Her voice dropped. There were bruises on his neck. I smelled something sweet on his clothes, like ether, but the sheriff wouldn't listen. Luke had seen enough frontier justice to know how these things worked. A little poison in the water bucket, a pillow over the face while a man slept, easy enough to make murder look natural when the law was spread thin and inclined to look the other way. I'm sorry, he said simply. Samuel was a good man. Clara continued, her voice stronger now. We came out here with such dreams. Build a life, raise a family, prove up the land. He worked from dawn to dusk every day. Never complained. We were happy. She set the ruined book aside with the gentle hands. Then Garrison decided he wanted our water rights, and Samuel wouldn't sell. So they killed him and figured a widow would be easier to persuade. They figured right. According to most folks, everyone expects me to sell and move back east where I belong. Even Samuel's own cousin said as much. Fire flashed in her green eyes. But this is my home. Samuel's buried on that hill yonder. I won't abandon him or what we built. Luke respected that. He'd known too many people who ran at the first sign of trouble, who valued their lives more than their principles. This woman had steel in her spine. They worked until the worst of the mess was cleared. Then Clara insisted on fixing supper despite her exhaustion. It was simple fare, beans and cornbread, but she moved around the kitchen with practiced efficiency, drawing comfort from familiar tasks. As they ate, Luke studied her in the lamplight. Pretty. Yes, but it was her spirit that drew him, the way she refused to be beaten, the quiet dignity with which she faced disaster. She reminded him of his mother, who'd kept the farm running while his father and brothers went to war, who'd faced down deserters and bushwhackers with nothing but a shotgun and sheer determination. You fought in the war, Clara said suddenly. It wasn't a question. How did you know? The way you move, always watching the exits, and your hands, you keep them where you can reach your gun. She gave him a small smile. Samuel was the same way at first. Said it took him 2 years to stop jumping at sudden noises. Your husband fought? Ohio 23rd Infantry. 3 years. Came home with a limp and nightmares, but he came home. Her smile turned sad. Survived Antietam and Chancellorsville just to die at his own well. They finished the meal in silence. As Clara cleared the dishes, Luke made his decision. I'll stay the night. Keep watch. Make sure Morrison doesn't come back while you're recovering. She turned to face him, searching his expression. Why would you do that for a stranger? Luke considered his answer. The truth was complicated, part loneliness, part anger at men like Morrison, part something else he couldn't name. The way she'd looked at him when he cut her free, like he was an answer to prayer. The way she'd moved around her broken home with such fierce determination. Maybe I'm tired of seeing bad men win, he said finally. Maybe I think a woman who's brave enough to face down the Garrison Land Company deserves a fair chance. And maybe you're just a good man, Mr. Thornton. Luke, he corrected. And I wouldn't go that far, but I know right from wrong, and what they did here was wrong. Clara studied him for a long moment, then nodded. There's clean straw in the barn loft. It's dry and warm enough. I'd offer you the house, but the barn's fine. Better view of the road from there anyway. He stood, gathering his rifle. Bar the door behind me. Try to get some rest. Tomorrow we'll figure out what to do about Morrison and Garrison. At the door, he paused. You did well today, Mrs. Henderson. Not many would have survived what you did. I had no choice. There's always a choice. You chose to fight. You chose to survive. Don't forget that. He stepped out into the cooling night air, waiting until he heard the bar drop across the door. The barn was sturdy and well built, like everything else on the homestead. In the loft, he found a good position where he could watch both the road and the house, As he settled in for a long vigil, Luke wondered what tomorrow would bring. Morrison would return. That was certain. Men like him didn't give up easy, especially when there was money involved. But Clara Henderson wouldn't face them alone this time. She'd have help, whether she wanted it or not. He'd drifted for 5 years, running from memories and ghosts. Maybe it was time to stop running. Maybe it was time to make a stand, even if it wasn't his fight. The woman in that cabin had shown more courage in one day than most showed in a lifetime. The least he could do was watch her back. The stars wheeled overhead, bright in the clear prairie sky. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called to its pack. Luke checked his rifle, made sure his pistol was loose in its holster, and settled into wait. Whatever came with the dawn, Clara Henderson wouldn't face it alone. He'd whispered that promise to the night, and Luke Thornton always kept his word. The first rays of dawn painted the eastern sky in shades of rose and gold, filtering through the cracks in the barn walls where Luke had spent the night on watch. He stretched stiff muscles, his body protesting the hours spent on hardboards, rifle across his knees. The homestead had remained quiet through the darkness, with only the usual sounds of the prairie night coyotes calling, owls hunting, the wind whispering secrets to the grass. Luke climbed down from the loft, his boots hitting the packed earth with a soft thud. He'd barely slept, but that was nothing new. Years of drifting had taught him to catch rest where he could, to stay alert even in slumber. He splashed water from the trough on his face, the cold shock bringing him fully awake. The cabin door opened as he approached, and Clara stepped onto the porch. She'd cleaned herself up, her hair now pinned properly, wearing a different dress, dark blue cotton, patched but clean. The rope burns on her wrists were wrapped in white cloth, and the bruise on her cheek had darkened to purple, but she stood straight and steady. "Morning," Luke said, touching his hat brim. "How are you feeling?" "Sore but alive, thanks to you." She gestured toward the kitchen. "Coffee's on, and I've got biscuits in the oven. It's the least I can do." They ate breakfast in comfortable silence. The simple meal of biscuits and gravy with black coffee, somehow tasting better than any fancy restaurant fare Luke had sampled in Denver or San Francisco. Clara moved around the kitchen with easy efficiency, and he noticed how she'd already begun putting her home back to rights. Curtains mended and rehung, dishes washed and stacked, floors swept clean. "You've been busy," he observed. "Couldn't sleep much." She poured more coffee, her hands steady now. "Kept thinking they'd come back in the night. Every sound had me reaching for Samuel's rifle, then remembering they took it. We'll need to do something about that. A woman alone needs protection. I've got $20 hidden that they didn't find. Maybe enough for an old shotgun in town." Luke thought of the Winchester in his saddle scabbard, the Colt on his hip, the hideout gun in his boot. He'd accumulated weapons like some men collected debts, each one a reminder of a close call survived. "We'll figure something out," he said. After breakfast, they worked together to repair what damage they could. Luke rehung the door properly, hammering the hinges back into place and reinforcing the frame. Clara tackled the torn books and papers, trying to salvage what she could of their small library and important documents. "Samuel loved to read," she said, carefully pressing pages flat. "Said a man ought to feed his mind as well as his body. He'd read to me in the evenings, poetry, sometimes, or stories about far-off places. Mr. Dickens was his favorite." "You miss him?" It wasn't a question. "Every minute of every day." She set aside a volume of Shakespeare, too damaged to save. "We knew each other such a short time, really 3.5 years, but it felt like forever, like I'd been waiting my whole life to meet him. And once I did, everything made sense." Luke understood that feeling. Though he'd never found it for himself, he'd courted a girl before the war, pretty Sarah Beckwith with cornflower eyes and a laugh like church bells. But when he'd come home missing pieces of himself, not just the chunk of shoulder where the bullet had torn through, but pieces of his soul, she'd looked at him like he was a stranger. "Married his brother within 6 months. He was lucky to have you," Luke said. Clara smiled sadly. I was the lucky one, a farmer's daughter with rough hands and too many opinions. And he treated me like a queen, said I was the strongest woman he knew, that together we could build something lasting. She touched the window frame, where carved initials were barely visible. S.H. plus C.H. I won't let Morrison and Garrison destroy what we built. I can't. They worked through the morning, the sun climbing higher and the heat building. Luke fixed the chicken coop where boards had been kicked loose, while Clara tended her vegetable garden, salvaging what plants hadn't been trampled. It was good, honest work, the kind that cleared a man's head and settled his spirit. Around midday, as they sat on the porch sharing water and cornbread, Luke brought up what had been on his mind. They'll be back, you know. Morrison won't leave things as they are. I know. Clara's jaw tightened. But I won't run. This is my land. Not saying you should run, but we need to be ready. Tell me more about Garrison. How many men does he have? Clara considered. Maybe a dozen who do his dirty work. Morrison's the worst, but there's others. Tom Brennan, Joe Stokes, a few more I've seen around. They've run off 3 families already this year. And the law? She laughed bitterly. Sheriff Watson's brother-in-law works for Garrison. The marshal in Dodge City might listen, but by the time he rode out here, if he ever did, it'd be too late. Luke nodded. He'd seen this play before in other towns, other territories. Money bought influence. Influence bought protection. And folks like Clara got crushed in between. What about neighbors? Anyone who might help? The Millers are 5 miles north, but they got their own troubles. The Johnsons to the east already sold out and left. There's old Ben Cooper about 10 miles south, but he's 70 if he's a day. She shrugged. People mind their own business out here, safer that way. Maybe it's time to change that. Before Clara could respond, they both heard it. Hoofbeats approaching from the east. Multiple riders, coming fast. Luke was on his feet instantly, his hand dropping to his pistol. Inside, he said quietly. Quick now. But Clara stood firm, squinting at the dust cloud. No, this is my home. I'll face them on my feet. Luke admired her courage even as he cursed her stubbornness. He stepped slightly in front of her, his stance casual but ready. The riders came into view, 4 men. Morrison in the lead on a big black gelding. They reined up about 20 yards from the porch, horses stamping and blowing. Morrison's eyes went from Clara to Luke, his expression darkening. Well, seems the widow's found herself a friend. He spat tobacco juice into the dust. Don't believe we've been introduced. Stranger. Name's Thornton, Luke said easily. Just passing through. Funny place to pass through. This road don't really go anywhere. Morrison's hand rested on his gun butt. A clear threat. Maybe you should keep on passing. Maybe I like the view. The other men shifted in their saddles. Luke recognized the type hired muscle. Mean and not too bright. Loyal to whoever paid them. One had a scar across his nose, probably the Brennan that Clara had mentioned. Another was young, maybe 19, trying to look tough but nervous around the eyes. Mrs. Henderson. Morrison said, ignoring Luke now. Hope you've had time to reconsider Mr. Garrison's offer. He's willing to go as high as $200 for your land. That's more than fair for this dried-up patch. My land's not for sale, Clara said, her voice steady. Not for 200, not for 2,000. Now that's just foolish talk. A woman alone can't work this place. You got no stock, no money for seed, banknote coming due. Why make things hard on yourself? The only hard thing around here is getting you to understand the word no. Clara stepped forward, and Luke tensed. You come onto my property, break into my home, assault me, destroy my belongings, and then expect me to sell to you? You must think I'm either stupid or scared. Morrison's face flushed red. You should be scared, woman. Accidents happen out here all the time. Just ask your husband. The words hung in the air like a challenge. Luke saw Clara go rigid, her hands clenching into fists. Before she could respond, he spoke up, his voice deceptively mild. That sounded like a threat. Morrison, maybe even a confession. Morrison's eyes snapped to him. You stay out of this, Drifter. This ain't your concern. Made it my concern when I found this lady tied up and left to die. Takes a special kind of coward to do that to a woman. The younger rider's hand twitched toward his gun, but Morrison held up a hand. Easy. Billy, Mr. Thornton here doesn't understand how things work around here. See, Mr. Garrison owns most of this county, one way or another. What he wants, he gets. Not this land, Clara said firmly. We'll see about that. Morrison gathered his reins. Mr. Garrison wanted me to give you one last chance to be reasonable. You've got till tomorrow noon. After that, he shrugged. Well, Prairie's a dangerous place. All sorts of accidents could happen. He turned his horse, then looked back at Luke. You'd be smart to ride on. Thornton, this ain't your fight, and we got no quarrel with you. Yet. Appreciate the advice, Luke said, but I think I'll stick around a while. Mrs. Henderson makes fine biscuits. Morrison's expression promised violence, but he just nodded curtly and spurred his horse. The other riders followed. Billy throwing one last glance over his shoulder, they watched the dust cloud fade into the distance before either spoke. You shouldn't have done that, Clara said quietly. Now you're a target too. Been a target before. Luke turned to face her. Question is, what do we do now? They'll be back, and not for conversation next time. Clara straightened her shoulders. Then we'd best be ready for them. They spent the afternoon preparing. Luke rode Sage to the creek and filled every bucket and barrel with water, in case Morrison tried to burn them out. Clara gathered what valuables remained and hid them in a canvas bag buried behind the chicken coop. Together they barricaded the windows with planks from the barn, leaving slots to shoot through. Samuel taught me to shoot, Clara said as they worked. I'm no Annie Oakley, but I can hit what I aim at. Good, but we're still outgunned. Luke did mental calculations. 4 of them at least, probably more when they come back. We need help. I told you, there isn't any, maybe not. He'd been thinking about the young rider. Billy, the way his eyes had shifted when Morrison mentioned Samuel's death. That boy with Morrison, he looked uncomfortable. Might be he's having second thoughts about the company he keeps. Billy Hartwell, he's Tom Brennan's nephew, just started riding with them this spring. Clara paused in her hammering. His mother goes to my church. She's a good woman, worried sick about him falling in with Morrison's crowd. Might be worth talking to him, or to his mother. It's too dangerous. I won't put anyone else at risk. As the sun began its descent, they shared another simple meal. The tension was thick between them now. Not unpleasant, but charged with awareness. Clara had shed her apron, and wisps of hair had escaped her pins to frame her face. In the golden evening light, she looked younger, softer, though the steel never left her spine. Why are you really doing this? She asked suddenly. You could have ridden on this morning. Should have, probably. Luke considered his answer. My mother was like you, after Pa died. She held on to our farm with pure stubbornness and a fowling piece. Faced down carpetbaggers and tax collectors and anyone else who tried to take what was ours. He smiled at the memory. She died in her own bed at 73, still on that farm. I always admired that about her. Is she why you drift? Running from home? Running from ghosts? More like lost 2 brothers in the war. Came home to find my girl married to the 3rd. Nothing left there but memories and guilt. He met her eyes. Been running 5 years now. Maybe I'm tired of it. Clara reached across the table and touched his hand briefly. The contact electric. Maybe it's time to stop running then. They held each other's gaze for a long moment before Clara pulled back, color rising in her cheeks. I should check the livestock. Luke watched her go, then stood and walked to the window. The sun was setting in a blaze of orange and red, painting the prairie in shades of fire. Tomorrow would bring violence. He was certain. But tonight, in this small cabin with this remarkable woman, he felt something he hadn't experienced in years. He felt like he was home. The morning after Morrison's visit dawned clear and hot, with not a cloud in the endless Kansas sky. Luke and Clara worked through breakfast in tense silence, both knowing that the noon deadline loomed like a storm on the horizon. Every sound made them look up. Every dust devil in the distance could be riders approaching. "We can't just wait here like sitting ducks," Luke said finally, setting down his coffee cup. "We need to know what they're planning." Clara nodded, her face drawn but determined. "There's a rise about 2 miles south where you can see the main road from town. Samuel used to—" Her voice caught slightly. "Samuel used to go there to watch for the supply wagons. I'll ride out, see if I can spot anything." Luke checked his pistol, a gesture as automatic as breathing. "You'll be all right here. I've got the shotgun you bought yesterday." She patted the old double barrel leaning against the wall. It had cost most of her hidden money, but Luke had insisted. "I'll bar the door and watch from the windows." Luke saddled Sage quickly, his mind already working through possibilities. In open combat, they didn't stand a chance against Morrison's men, but if they could avoid a direct confrontation, maybe negotiate or stall until they could get word to the marshal in Dodge City. He stopped at the door, looking back at Clara. She stood framed in morning light, chin high, looking every inch the frontier woman despite the fear he could see in her eyes. "I'll be back within the hour," he promised. "Be careful." The words were simple, but the weight behind them said more. Luke touched his hat and rode out. Sage's hooves raising small clouds of dust, the prairie stretched endlessly in all directions, brown grass waving in the slight breeze. He loved this land. He realized its vastness, its indifference, the way it stripped a man down to what really mattered. You couldn't lie to the prairie or pretend to be something you weren't. It would kill you for the smallest mistake, but it was honest about it. The rise Clara had mentioned gave a good view of the surrounding country. Luke dismounted just below the crest, creeping up on foot to avoid skylining himself. What he saw made his jaw tighten. A dust cloud to the east, bigger than 4 riders would make. Morrison was bringing reinforcements. But there was another rider, coming from the north, moving fast. Luke pulled out his field glasses, another war souvenir, and focused on the lone figure. His surprise must have shown on his face when he recognized young Billy Hartwell, riding hard toward the Henderson place. Luke mounted quickly and intercepted the boy about a mile from the cabin. Billy's horse was lathered with sweat, and the young man's face was pale beneath his hat brim. "Mr. Thornton!" Billy reined up hard, his horse dancing. "I gotta warn Mrs. Henderson. Morrison's coming with 8 men. They aim to burn her out if she don't sign the papers." "Why are you telling us this, son?" Billy's Adam's apple bobbed as he swallowed hard. "It ain't right. What they're doing. My ma didn't raise me to hurt women. And what Morrison said about Mr. Henderson." He shook his head. "I joined up thinking we were just encouraging folks to sell, not this." Luke studied the boy. He couldn't be more than 19, still young enough to have a conscience. "You know there'll be consequences for crossing Morrison." "Yes, sir, but I can't be part of burning out a widow. My PA would roll over in his grave." "All right, ride to the cabin. Tell Mrs. Henderson what you told me. Then get out of here. Head north to the Miller place and stay low." "What are you going to do?" Luke smiled grimly. "Try to even the odds a little." He sent Billy on and turned Sage east, riding hard to intercept Morrison's group. 8 men plus Morrison made 9 impossible odds in a straight fight. But Luke had learned in the war that numbers didn't always tell the whole story. He found a good spot where the trail narrowed between 2 rock outcroppings, scattered with boulders big enough to provide cover. Working quickly, he gathered tumbleweeds and dry brush, piling them across the trail. It wouldn't stop determined riders, but it might slow them down, make them bunch up. Luke heard them coming before he saw them, voices carrying on the wind, the jingle of spurs and creak of leather. He positioned himself behind a boulder, rifle ready. When Morrison appeared around the bend, Luke fired, the shot kicking up dust directly in front of the big black gelding. "That's far enough. Morrison!" Luke called out. already shifted to a different position. "Turn around and ride back to town." The riders milled in confusion, horses shying at the sudden shot. Morrison fought to control his mount, his face red with fury. "Thornton, you're making a big mistake. Drifter!" "Won't be my first." Luke fired again, this time splintering a rock near Tom Brennan's head. "Next one won't be a warning." "You're 1 man against 9, Morrison shouted. "You can't stop us all." "Maybe not, but I can stop some of you. Question is, which ones want to die for Garrison's money?" Luke saw the riders exchange glances. Hired guns were brave enough when the odds favored them, but faced with a rifleman in good cover, their enthusiasm waned. He pressed the advantage. "I spent 3 years in the war. Morrison, Shiloh, Antietam, Cold Harbor. I've sent more men to their maker than you've had hot dinners. You sure you want to test me?" It was mostly bluff. Luke had been in those battles, but as a scout and messenger, not a sharpshooter. Still, they didn't know that. He shifted position again, making it seem like there might be more than one defender. "There's no need for bloodshed," Morrison called out, trying a different tack. "We're just going to talk to the widow, make sure she understands her situation. With 8 armed men? That's some conversation." Luke let them see the rifle barrel tracking across their group. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to turn around and ride back to town. Tell Garrison that Mrs. Henderson's land isn't for sale. Not now. Not ever. You can't protect her forever, Thornton." "Don't need forever. Just long enough for the federal marshal to get here from Dodge. Already sent a rider with a full report of your activities, including what you said about Samuel Henderson's death." It was a lie, but Morrison couldn't know that. Luke saw the uncertainty in the way he sat his horse, the way his men kept looking to him for direction. "Boss," one of the hired guns said nervously, "maybe we should talk to Mr. Garrison first. He didn't say nothing about going up against no war veteran." Morrison's face was a study in frustrated rage, but he wasn't stupid. 1 man in good cover could hold this position for hours, and every minute increased the chance that Luke's mythical messenger might reach Dodge City. "This isn't over," Morrison finally growled. "You tell that woman she's living on borrowed time. Both of you are. We'll take our chances." Luke fired 1 more shot, close enough to make Morrison's horse rear. "Now get!" They wheeled their horses and rode back the way they'd come, Morrison shouting curses that the wind carried away. Luke waited until the dust settled, then mounted Sage and rode hard for the cabin, taking a circuitous route in case they doubled back. He found Clara and Billy on the porch, the boy preparing to leave. Clara's face lit up with relief when she saw him. "Luke, Billy told me what happened. Are you all right?" "Fine. Managed to turn them back, but it's just a delay." He dismounted, noticing how Billy watched him with something like hero worship. "Son, you did a brave thing today. But you need to get gone before Morrison figures out who warned us." "Yes, sir. My ma's cousin has a place up in Nebraska. Think I'll head that way." Billy turned to Clara. "Ma'am, I'm real sorry about everything. Your husband was a good man. What Morrison said, it wasn't right." Clara's voice was gentle. "Thank you, Billy. Give my regards to your mother. Tell her she raised a fine son." The boy colored and mounted quickly, riding north with the haste of someone who just realized the magnitude of what he'd done. Luke watched him go, then turned to Clara. "We bought some time, but not much. Morrison will lick his wounds and come back, probably at night when it's harder to defend. Then we have work to do." Clara's jaw was set with determination. "I won't let them drive me off my land." They spent the rest of the day preparing for siege. Luke showed Clara how to load and fire his rifle, drilling her until she could do it smoothly. They filled every container with water, stocked ammunition at each window, prepared torches in case attackers came in darkness. As the sun began to sink, they sat on the porch, sharing a cold supper and watching the horizon. The prairie was peaceful, deceptively so, with meadowlarks singing their evening songs and the wind rustling through the grass. "It's beautiful," Clara said softly. "Even with everything, I still love this land. Samuel used to say it got in your blood, The prairie, that once you'd lived under this big sky, anywhere else would feel like a cage. He was right. Luke found himself reaching for her hand, and she didn't pull away. I've been to cities, seen the elephant as they say, but nothing compares to this. The freedom, the possibility. The loneliness, Clara added quietly. That too. But maybe loneliness is just freedom you haven't figured out how to use yet. She turned to look at him, really look at him, and something passed between them in that moment, an understanding, a recognition of kindred spirits who'd found each other in this vast emptiness. "Luke," she began, then stopped, uncertainty flickering in her eyes. "I know," he said simply. "It's too soon, too fast. You're still grieving, and I'm just a drifter who happened by. But Clara," he squeezed her hand gently, "I want you to know that whatever happens tonight, tomorrow, next week, I'm not running anymore. Not from this." Tears gathered in her eyes, but she blinked them back. "I can't promise anything. My heart's still too raw, too full of Samuel. I'm not asking for promises, just letting you know where I stand." They sat in comfortable silence as darkness gathered, hands linked, drawing strength from each other. The night sounds of the prairie began. Crickets, a distant owl, the rustle of small creatures in the grass. "They'll come tonight," Luke said eventually. "I know." Clara's voice was steady. "But we'll be ready." As if in answer to her words, a light flickered in the distance, then another, and another. Torches, bobbing like fireflies as riders approached across the dark prairie. "Inside," Luke said urgently, pulling Clara to her feet. "Remember what I taught you. Short, controlled shots. Make each one count." They took their positions. Luke at the front window, Clara at the side. The shotgun lay ready as backup. Outside, the torches spread out, surrounding the cabin. Luke counted at least 10 men, maybe more. Morrison's voice carried through the night. "Last chance, widow. Come out and sign the papers, or we'll burn you out." Clara's response was to thrust her rifle barrel through the firing slot. "The only thing I'm signing is your death warrant if you come any closer." "So be it," Morrison shouted. The first torch arced through the air, trailing sparks like a falling star. It hit the roof, which Luke had soaked with water that afternoon. The torch fizzled and died. Another followed, then another, but the wet wood refused to catch. "Now!" Luke barked. They fired simultaneously. Clara's shot going wide, but Luke's finding its mark. A man cried out and fell from his horse. The attackers scattered, returning fire that thudded into the thick walls of the cabin. The battle for the Henderson homestead had begun. The gunfire erupted like thunder across the prairie, muzzle flashes lighting up the darkness in deadly starbursts. Luke worked the lever of his Winchester with practiced efficiency, picking his targets carefully. Beside him, Clara had overcome her initial nervousness, her shots becoming more accurate with each trigger pull. "Keep your head down," Luke shouted over the din as a bullet splintered the window frame inches from Clara's face. She ducked back, quickly reloading. Morrison's men had taken cover behind water troughs, fence posts, and the chicken coop, pouring fire into the cabin. But the thick log Samuel had chosen held firm, turning aside all but the luckiest shots. Luke had been in worse spots during the war. At least here they had walls between them and the enemy. "The barn!" Clara called out suddenly. "They're trying to flank us through the barn!" Luke shifted position, catching sight of 2 figures creeping through the shadows. He led the first man carefully, squeezed the trigger, and watched him spin and fall. The second dove for cover, but not before Luke put a bullet through his shoulder. The attack faltered. Morrison's curses carried clearly through the night air as he tried to rally his men. These weren't soldiers, Luke realized. Just hired guns used to intimidating unarmed homesteaders, faced with real resistance. Their resolve was crumbling. "Morrison," Luke called out during a lull in the shooting. "You've lost 2 men already, maybe 3. How many more you willing to sacrifice for Garrison's money?" "As many as it takes," came the snarled response. "You can't hold out forever." But Luke heard the uncertainty beneath the bravado. He pressed the advantage. Your men signed on to push around farmers and widows, not get into a real fight. Ask them if Garrison's paying enough to die for. He saw shadows moving, heard urgent whispers. Clara touched his arm. They're pulling back toward the road. Sure enough, the shooting was tapering off. Luke risked a look through the window and saw men mounting horses, some helping wounded companions. Morrison sat his black gelding, gesturing angrily, but his men were already leaving. "This ain't over," Morrison shouted. "You hear me? Thornton, this ain't over by a long shot." "It is for tonight," Luke called back. "And if you're smart, it's over for good. The marshal knows what you've been doing." Morrison wheeled his horse and galloped after his retreating men, their torches bobbing away into the darkness like dying fireflies. Soon, only the acrid smell of gunpowder and the ringing in their ears remained as evidence of the battle. Luke kept watch for another hour, making sure it wasn't a trick, before finally relaxing. "I think they're gone, for now, anyway." Clara sank into a chair, the rifle sliding from her trembling hands. "I shot at men. I actually shot at human beings. You defended your home," Luke corrected gently. "There's no shame in that." "I know. It's just, I never thought I'd have to. Samuel always said the West was changing, becoming civilized. But it's still wild, isn't it? Still violent and cruel?" Luke knelt beside her chair, covering her cold hands with his. "There's wild and there's wild. Yes, there are men like Morrison who think might makes right, but there's also people like you, building something good out here. That's the real strength of the frontier, not the guns, but the grit." She managed a weak smile. "Samuel would have liked you." "I hope so. I'd have liked to know him." They spent the rest of the night cleaning weapons and watching, taking turns dozing in the chair. When dawn finally painted the eastern sky pink and gold, Luke made a thorough scout of the property. He found blood trails leading away from the cabin, spent brass casings glinting in the early light, and one abandoned hat with a bullet hole through the crown. "We did better than I thought," he told Clara over breakfast. "Hit at least 3 of them, maybe 4. Morrison won't find it so easy to recruit men after this." "But he'll be back," Clara said. It wasn't a question. "Maybe, or maybe Garrison will decide you're too much trouble. Men like him are businessmen first. If the cost gets too high, they look elsewhere." Clara pushed eggs around her plate, appetite clearly gone. "I can't ask you to stay." "This isn't your fight. You're not asking. I'm offering." Luke met her eyes steadily. "And it became my fight the moment I cut those ropes off you." Before Clara could respond, they heard horses approaching. Luke grabbed his rifle, but Clara put a hand on his arm. "Wait, that's Ben Cooper's old gray. I'd recognize that wheeze anywhere." Sure enough, old Ben Cooper rode up on a horse that looked as ancient as he was, accompanied by 2 younger men Luke didn't recognize. They dismounted carefully, hands visible and away from their weapons. "Mrs. Henderson," Ben called out, his voice creaky but strong. "Heard there was some commotion out this way last night. Thought we'd check on you." Clara stepped onto the porch, Luke close behind. "Mr. Cooper, it's good to see you. This here's my nephews, Jim and Frank, visiting from Colorado." The 2 men, both in their 30s and bearing the weathered look of working cowboys, touched their hats. "We heard shooting late last night. Carried a fair piece. Figured it might be Morrison making good on his threats." "It was," Clara admitted. "Mr. Thornton here helped me drive them off." Ben studied Luke with sharp eyes that belied his age. "Thornton, eh? You the one shot up Morrison's boys at the Narrows yesterday?" "News travels fast out here," Luke observed. "Faster than a prairie fire." Ben spat tobacco juice with remarkable accuracy. "Mrs. Henderson, my Martha would skin me alive if I didn't say this. You're welcome at our place. This ain't no place for a woman alone." "I appreciate that, Mr. Cooper, but this is my home. I won't be driven off." The old man nodded as if he'd expected that answer. "Figured as much. You got sand, girl, just like your Samuel. He'd be proud." He turned to his nephews. "Boys, Why don't you have a look around? See if there's any damage needs fixing." As the younger men inspected the property, Ben drew Luke aside. "You planning on sticking around, Thornton?" "As long as Mrs. Henderson needs me." "Good. She'll need all the help she can get. Garrison owns half the county, one way or another. But there's some of us he don't own. Some of us remember when this was free range, before the big money came in trying to squeeze out the little folk. Are you saying there might be others willing to help?" Ben's weathered face cracked in what might have been a smile. "I'm saying a man who stands up to Morrison might find he's got more friends than he thinks. Word's already spreading about last night. Folks are tired of being pushed around." They spent the morning repairing damage from the fight, the Cooper men proving handy with hammer and saw. Clara worked alongside them, her spirits visibly lifting at this unexpected support. By noon, the worst of the damage was fixed, and the cabin looked almost normal except for the bullet pocks in the logs. As the Coopers prepared to leave, Ben pressed a box of ammunition into Luke's hands. "For next time," he said quietly, "and there will be a next time, but you might not be as alone as you think." After they left, Clara and Luke sat on the porch, watching dust devils dance across the prairie. The morning's work and unexpected visit had shifted something in the atmosphere. Hope. Luke thought. That's what had been missing. "Ben Cooper hasn't left his ranch in 2 years, Clara said wonderingly. "Martha says his arthritis is so bad he can barely mount a horse, but he came. You've got more friends than you know. Morrison's mistake was thinking fear was stronger than community out here." Clara turned to him, and Luke saw something new in her eyes. Not just gratitude or dependence, but something deeper. "I couldn't have done this without you. When you found me that night, I thought it was over. Everything Samuel and I worked for, dreamed of, but you gave me hope again." "You never lost hope," Luke corrected. "You just mislaid it for a while." She stood abruptly, color rising in her cheeks. "I should check on the chickens. This morning's excitement has them all riled up." Luke watched her go, understanding her need to retreat. Whatever was growing between them, and something definitely was, it was too new, too fragile to examine closely. But it was there, as real as the prairie wind. That afternoon brought another surprise. A small convoy of wagons appeared from the north, the Millers and 2 other families Luke didn't know. They brought food, ammunition, and most importantly, solidarity. "Heard Morrison tried to burn you out," Tom Miller said, his usually dour face animated with anger. "That ain't right. Man's got a right to defend his property, and so does a widow." "We've all had enough," his wife added, pressing a fresh-baked pie into Clara's hands. "First the Johnsons, then the Krauses, now you." "Where does it end?" They stayed for supper, turning the evening into an impromptu gathering. Stories were shared of Morrison's intimidation tactics, Garrison's gradual takeover of the county, the way the law looked the other way, but also stories of the old days, when neighbors helped neighbors and a handshake was better than any contract. "We could organize," Jim Cooper suggested. He and his brother had returned with their uncle. "Form a mutual defense association. Morrison can't burn us all out." "He can try," someone muttered, but others nodded agreement. Luke watched it all with a tactical eye. These weren't fighters, mostly, but they were tough people who'd survived droughts and storms and Indian raids. With organization and leadership, they could be formidable. As the evening wore on, he found himself drawing diagrams in the dirt, explaining fields of fire and defensive positions. The men listened intently while the women planned communication networks and supply sharing. "Never thought I'd be planning for war," Clara said quietly, standing beside him as he explained crossfire tactics. "Samuel wanted to build a peaceful life here. Sometimes you have to fight for peace." Luke replied, "Your husband understood that. It's why he stood up to Garrison in the first place." The gathering broke up near midnight, but not before plans were made. The Coopers would spread word south, the Millers north. If Morrison came again, signal fires would bring help. It wasn't much, but it was a start. As the last wagon rolled away, Clara and Luke stood alone under the vast canopy of stars. The night was cooling, a blessed relief after the day's heat. And somewhere a screech owl called. "Everything's changed," Clara said softly. "This morning I was alone, fighting a losing battle. Now you're part of something bigger. Garrison thought he was just pushing around individual homesteaders. He's about to learn different." Clara looked up at him, starlight reflecting in her eyes. "And you? Are you part of this something bigger?" Luke felt the moment balance on a knife's edge. 5 years of drifting, of avoiding connections, of running from anything that might matter. But looking at this woman who'd faced down armed men to defend her home, who'd turned disaster into determination, he knew his wandering days were done. "I am," he said simply. "For as long as you'll have me." She reached up, touching his face gently. "That might be a very long time." Luke Thornton. "I'm counting on it." Clara Henderson. They stood there under the stars, two souls who'd found each other in the vast emptiness of the prairie, while the night wind whispered of changes coming. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new dangers. Morrison would return. Garrison would escalate. The fight for the land would intensify. But tonight, they were not alone, and in the wild heart of Kansas. Sometimes that made all the difference. The Henderson homestead had been transformed in the week since the night attack. Where once stood a lonely cabin, now a small fortress emerged. Neighbors came daily, bringing supplies and willing hands. They dug defensive positions, reinforced walls, and established watch rotations. The prairie community had awakened, and Clara stood at its heart. Luke watched her directing the work, her natural leadership shining through. She'd traded her patched dresses for practical canvas pants and work shirts, her hair bound back in a no-nonsense braid. The frightened woman he'd found bound on the floor was gone, replaced by someone tempered in fire. "Riders coming," young Tom Miller called from his watch position. "Looks like the sheriff?" Sheriff Watson rode up with 2 deputies, his face sour as week-old milk. He surveyed the defensive preparations with obvious displeasure. "Mrs. Henderson, what's all this? Looks like you're preparing for war." "Just protecting what's mine, Sheriff," Clara replied coolly. "Something the law seems disinclined to do." Watson's face reddened. "Now see here, that's no way to talk to a representative of the law. I've had complaints about gunfire, about threats made against upstanding citizens." "You mean Morrison?" Luke interrupted, stepping forward. "The same Morrison who broke into this house and assaulted Mrs. Henderson. Where were you then, Sheriff?" "I don't recall any formal complaint being filed," Watson said stiffly. "Because you refused to take one." Clara shot back. "Just like you refused to investigate my husband's death properly." The sheriff shifted uncomfortably in his saddle. "I'm here to tell you that Mr. Garrison is willing to make one final offer. $300 for your land. That's more than generous. Considering what?" Clara's voice was dangerous now. "Considering the trouble you've been causing, good people of this county don't appreciate all this upheaval." Ben Cooper, who'd been working on the fortifications, ambled over. "Which good people would those be? Sheriff? The ones Garrison hasn't bought or run off yet?" Watson glared at the old rancher. "This doesn't concern you, Cooper. Everything in this county concerns me. Boy, I was here before you were born, before Garrison ever heard of Kansas, and I'll be here when you're both gone." The sheriff's hand twitched toward his gun, but Luke's voice stopped him cold. "I wouldn't, not unless you want to explain to the federal marshal why you drew on unarmed citizens." "What federal marshal?" Luke smiled. "The one who'll be very interested in our written testimonies about Morrison's activities. Assault, attempted murder, conspiracy to defraud, federal crimes. Sheriff, out of your jurisdiction." It was still mostly bluff, but Watson didn't know that. He gathered his reins, face purple with suppressed rage. "You're making a mistake, all of you. Garrison's not a man to cross." "Neither am I," Clara said quietly. "Tell Garrison his money's no good here. Not for 300. Not for 3,000. This land isn't for sale. Watson and his men rode off, and the work resumed. But Luke noticed Clara's hands trembling slightly as she returned to her tasks. He caught up with her by the water barrel. "You all right?" She nodded, then shook her head. "I keep waiting to wake up, to find this is all a dream. A month ago I was just trying to survive each day. Now I'm leading some kind of rebellion. You're defending your home. Others are choosing to stand with you. There's a difference. Is there?" She looked around at the busy workers. "These people have their own families, their own problems. They shouldn't have to risk everything for me. They're not doing it for you. They're doing it for themselves, for their children, for the idea that a person should be able to live free on their own land." Luke touched her shoulder gently. "You just gave them the courage to act on what they already believed." That evening, as the sun painted the sky in brilliant oranges and purples, a different kind of visitor arrived. A well-dressed man in a black suit rode up on an expensive bay mare, alone and unarmed. He dismounted with careful dignity. "Mrs. Henderson, I'm James Fitzgerald, attorney at law from Dodge City." He presented a card with a flourish. "I understand you've been having some difficulties with the Garrison Land Company." Clara exchanged glances with Luke. "That's one way to put it." "May we speak privately?" Fitzgerald glanced meaningfully at the armed neighbors. They retired to the cabin, Luke insisting on being present. Fitzgerald laid out several documents on the table. "I represent certain interests in Dodge City who are concerned about Mr. Garrison's business practices. His methods have become increasingly aggressive, and it's bad for the overall development of the region." "What kind of interests?" Luke asked suspiciously. "Legitimate businessmen who believe in lawful commerce. The railroad is coming. Mr. Thornton, this land will be valuable, but only if there's clear title and peaceful development. Garrison's strong-arm tactics threaten everyone's investments." "So you want to use us to take down a rival?" Clara said flatly. Fitzgerald adjusted his spectacles. "I prefer to think of it as mutual benefit. I've researched your late husband's land claim, Mrs. Henderson. It's ironclad. Moreover, I found some interesting discrepancies in several of Garrison's acquisitions. Forged signatures, intimidated witnesses, suspicious deaths." "Like my Samuel?" "Possibly. With your permission, I'd like to request an official investigation. The territorial governor owes me some favors." "But I need witnesses, testimony, evidence." Clara leaned forward. "What's in it for you?" "Justice, Mrs. Henderson, and perhaps a small fee when Garrison's illegally obtained properties are rightfully restored to their owners or their heirs." It was Luke who voiced what they were both thinking. "Can we trust you?" Fitzgerald smiled thinly. "You can trust that my interests align with yours. Garrison has overreached. It's bad for business, bad for the territory's reputation. Help me stop him legally, and you'll never have to worry about Morrison or his ilk again." They talked long into the night, examining documents, discussing strategy. By the time Fitzgerald left, they had the beginnings of a legal case to accompany their physical defense. "It could work," Clara said wonderingly. "We might actually win this." "We will win," Luke corrected. "One way or another." The next morning brought news that sent ripples through their small community. Billy Hartwell had been found beaten nearly to death on the road to Nebraska. He was alive, but barely, recuperating at his mother's house. "Morrison," Clara said, her face pale. "Punishment for warning us, or a message to anyone else thinking of switching sides." Luke added grimly. The mood among the defenders darkened. This wasn't just about land anymore. It was about basic human decency, about the rule of law versus the rule of force. That afternoon, as if in response to their new resolve, Morrison appeared again, but this time he came under a white flag, accompanied by a man none of them recognized, a thin, cold-eyed gentleman in an expensive suit. "That's Garrison," Ben Cooper muttered. "Seen him in town." Thomas Garrison rode forward, stopping just outside rifle range. When he spoke, his voice carried clearly, cultured and calm. "Mrs. Henderson, I believe we've gotten off on the wrong foot. Perhaps we could discuss this like civilized people." Clara stood on the porch, flanked by Luke and several neighbors. "We have nothing to discuss. Mr. Garrison, my land isn't for sale. Everything is for sale. My dear woman, it's simply a matter of price." Garrison's smile was thin as a blade. "I'm prepared to offer $500, far more than this dusty patch is worth. My husband's grave is on this land. Mr. Garrison, what price would you put on that? Sentiment is a luxury few can afford on the frontier." His voice hardened. "I've been patient, Mrs. Henderson, but my patience has limits. Accept my offer, or face the consequences." It was Luke who answered, his voice carrying the same deadly calm as Garrison's. "The only consequences will be yours. Garrison, we know about the forged deeds, the intimidation, the murders. It's all going to come out." Garrison's composure cracked slightly. "You're playing a dangerous game. Drifter." "No game, just truth. And the truth has a way of finding light. We'll see about that." Garrison wheeled his horse around. "Morrison, we're leaving. For now." As they rode away, Clara sagged against the doorframe. "He won't stop. Men like him never stop." "No," Luke agreed. "But neither will we." That night, they held a war council. Representatives from 15 families crowded into the cabin. Voices raised in anger and determination. Plans were made, strategies discussed. The community that Garrison had tried to break apart was instead forging itself into something stronger. "We need to get word to that lawyer fellow," Tom Miller suggested. "Strike while the iron's hot. And someone needs to check on the Hartwell boy." His wife added, "Make sure he's protected." As the meeting broke up, Clara found herself alone with Luke on the porch once more. The stars wheeled overhead, eternal and indifferent to human struggles. "When this is over," she said quietly, "what will you do?" Luke was quiet for a long moment. "I've been drifting for 5 years. Clara, running from the past, from guilt, from life itself. But these past weeks," he turned to face her, "I've remembered what it feels like to have something worth fighting for. And after the fight, then comes the building. Your Samuel had the right idea. This land needs good people to work it, to make it bloom." He took her hands in his. "If you'll have me, I'd like to help with that building." Clara's eyes shimmered with tears. "Samuel would have wanted that. He believed in second chances. In the future." She squeezed his hands. "So do I." Luke drew her close, and she came willingly, resting her head against his chest. They stood there in the starlight, 2 wounded souls finding healing in each other, while the prairie wind sang of tomorrow's possibilities. "Whatever comes," Luke murmured into her hair, "we'll face it together." "Together," Clara agreed. The word, a promise, and a prayer. The next morning dawned bright with possibility. Word came that Fitzgerald had secured a federal investigation, that marshals were on their way. The community continued its preparations, but now with hope tempering their determination, as Clara worked in her garden, coaxing life from the dry soil. She thought about Samuel, about the dreams they'd shared. Those dreams hadn't died with him. They'd just been waiting for the right moment to bloom again. Luke joined her, rolling up his sleeves to help with the planting. "Spring crops," he asked. "Hope crops," Clara corrected, pressing seeds into the earth. "By the time these grow, this will all be over. We'll be free to build the life Samuel envisioned. Our life," Luke said gently. "The 3 of us, you, me, and his memory." Clara smiled through her tears, dirt-smudged hands reaching for his. "Our life," she agreed. In the distance, storm clouds gathered over the mountains, promising rain for the thirsty land. Change was coming to the prairie, not just in weather, but in the very fabric of society. The age of men like Garrison was ending, replaced by the steady strength of communities bound by law and mutual respect. But for now, in this moment, Clara and Luke knelt in the garden, planting seeds of tomorrow in the ancient soil, their hearts as intertwined as their futures. The land that had tested them so harshly now seemed to embrace them, welcoming them home. They had fought for this ground with blood and courage, had earned it through trial and sacrifice. Now, at last, they could begin to heal, to grow, to love. The prairie stretched endlessly around them, no longer a place of loneliness, but of infinite possibility. And somewhere, carried on the wind, came the faint sound of laughter, perhaps an echo from the past, perhaps a promise of the future, but certainly a blessing on two souls who had found each other in the wild heart of the West, who had refused to be silenced, and who would build their dreams on the foundation of unshakable love. Thank you for listening to this Wild West love story. I'd love to know where you're enjoying this tale. Are you listening during your commute, relaxing at home, or perhaps somewhere unexpected? Please subscribe to the From Wild West channel and share your thoughts in the comments below. Your feedback helps me create more stories that touch your heart. Let's connect and share our love for these frontier tales.